The Missing Sutra. This is the work in progress title for this novel, if it is ever completed. I was inspired to start writing this after attending several Thirsty Word sessions. And I read the first chapter, as Meredith said, in a Thirsty Word session some time ago. But since that was a while ago, I'm going to start with a synopsis of chapter 1 and then move to the second chapter, which is what I'm really reading. Chapter 1, Fork in the Road. Parvati, a historian from India, was visiting her aunt Aditi and uncle Erwin, who lived in Fairfield. Parvati had been researching the role of women in India's first war of independence in 1857 and had become particularly interested in the story of Princess Ziba of the erstwhile royal family of Awadh in northern India. Princess Ziba had, as a teenager, valiantly fought the British colonial power, but the British administration had massacred almost the entire royal family. Princess Ziba, however, managed to escape. And it was as if she had vanished into thin air. Decades went by and she was not even a footnote in Indian history. Till one day, in 1971, India woke up to read a small news item in the Times of India. Titled The Mystery of Princess Ziba of Awadh, the news item reported that according to recently available research, the princess had sailed to the USA and stayed in a mansion in a rural area for several years. 2 black and white photographs accompanied the news item, providing a view of the mansion and a view from the mansion of a bridge across a river. Aditi, in fact, had come to Fairfield because she was scheduled to meet with Professor Durga Cortez, an authority on the 1857 Indian War of Independence, who taught at the University of Iowa. On a lazy Saturday afternoon, while sitting in Cafe Paradiso and glancing at her favorite Fairfield photographer's Facebook page, Parvati chanced upon a post with photos of a historical mansion in Iowa, with a view of a bridge across the Des Moines River. Parvati was taken aback when she realized that the photo seemed to be of the same mansion that appeared in the news item in 1971. The building in both photos had the same unusual design on the brickwork that made up the facade. It turned out that the mansion in the photos was a hotel called Mason House Inn, located in Bentonsport, Iowa. This was the oldest steamboat hotel, she learned, built on the Des Moines River in 1846. Intrigued by the fact that the Mason House Inn could be where Princess Ziba had lived, Parvati continued her research about Mason House Inn, about steamboats, and so on, only to be startled by the discovery that a reference to someone called Clara Hine by Princess Ziba in a letter that Parvati had seen in the New Delhi Historical Archives was perhaps not about a woman, as Parvati had assumed, but probably about a steamboat named Clara Hine that plied the Des Moines River between 1858 and 1860 and stopped regularly in Bentonsport. That chapter ended with Parvati unable to decide whether she should go to meet with Professor Cortez on Monday, as was planned, or go to Hotel Manning, where she was told by her uncle a meetup of steamboat enthusiasts was scheduled on Monday. And then moving on to chapter 2, which is called Mason House Inn. On Saturday night, Parvati decided that a trip to Mason House Inn was worth taking to see if this was indeed where Princess Ziba had lived. She set out after an earlyish Sunday breakfast, and as she drove through the picturesque but uninhabited landscape, Parvati couldn't help feeling puzzled at the thought of Princess Ziba having lived in this rather remote rural area that was so different from the lavish splendor of her lifestyle in India. The palace that belonged to her family in India was rumored to have had 150 rooms filled with breathtaking artifacts and, of course, fabulous jewelry, specially crafted by Parisian jewelry houses such as Cartier, Boucheron, and Chaumet. As Parvati pulled up to Mason House Inn, she could feel an adrenaline rush that set her pulse racing just thinking about what she may find. She stepped inside the lobby and approached the front desk, hoping to speak to someone who might know something about the inn's history. To her surprise, the elderly lady behind the desk recognized her name and pulled out a folder from under the counter. "Oh, Miss Parvati, I've been expecting you. I'm Diane, manager of this Heritage Inn," she said with a smile. "I believe you're looking for information about Princess Zeba." Parvati's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't believe that Diane knew what she was looking for even before she had said anything. Parvati thanked Diane and made herself comfortable on the couch opposite the front desk and eagerly opened the folder. As she began to flip through the folder's contents, she felt as if she had chanced upon a treasure trove. There were old newspaper articles, a bundle of envelopes, and even photographs of Princess Zeba. Two items in particular caught her attention right away. One was a clipping of a newspaper advertisement for Tudor ice from Boston. The other was a photo of the circular ice house building situated on the Marina Beach in Madras. This particular photograph felt eerily familiar, but she just couldn't fathom why. This is very interesting. Why use a Sanskrit great saying from the Vedas, Tat Tvam Asi, meaning thou art that, as one's name, muttered Parvati to herself as she looked at the words Mr. Tat Tvam Asi scribbled across the bottom of both items. "Parvati, would you like to have some of our special coffee?" asked Diane from the front desk. Before she could respond, Diane said, "I just wanted you to know that our trustee, Professor Cortez, asked me to hand over that folder to you." "Oh, yes, that's it," silently exclaimed Parvati. "I remember seeing a larger version of this particular photo of the ice house on the wall behind Professor Cortez during our last Zoom call." Oh, and she now recollected the email she had sent to Professor Cortez last night telling her about the decision to visit Bentonsport. No wonder Diane had the folder ready. But why didn't Professor Cortez tell me that she's a trustee of Mason House Inn? Wondered a bewildered Parvati. Well, it is settled now, she thought to herself. The discovery of this ice house photo makes it clear I need to go meet Professor Cortez tomorrow as planned and not to the steamboat enthusiast meeting at Hotel Manning. Professor Cortez seems to know more about the princess than I had thought. Parvati glanced at the remaining items in the folder and decided to focus on the bundle of envelopes. The first thing she noticed was the envelopes were addressed to a Miss Callista Khan, Mason House in Bentonsport, Keosauqua. Why were envelopes addressed to some Callista Khan in this folder containing information about Princess Zeba? Surprisingly, the envelopes were empty, but the sender's name on each envelope was the same, Charles Ingham, Esquire. But what really surprised Parvati was the address of the sender, Hotel Manning, Keosauqua. She dropped the bundle of envelopes feeling lost. Any relief she had felt about deciding where she should go tomorrow turned into confusion. The ice house photo had to Parvati been a clear clue about which path to tread, but she was back to square one with the discovery of these letters from Hotel Manning. Parvati sighed and began collecting the envelopes from the floor. As she picked up the last few, something slipped out from one of them. She lifted it to find herself staring at a sepia-toned photograph of 11 people. Parvati gasped in horror to see how malnourished they were. They looked almost like skeletons with some clothes on. They were Indian, she guessed, given the sari draped over the only woman in the photo. Parvati turned the photo around to find, scribbled across the back, the words, "It is time to pay back the help you received to escape from British slavery. You cannot refuse. They must be saved. The Invisibility Sutra is needed now. Signed, Mr. Tattwam Asi." Who was Charles Ingham and who was Tattwam Asi? Was that a code of some kind? Was Princess Zeba using the name of Callista Khan while she stayed here? And why didn't Professor Cortez mention any of this to her? Parvati walked up to Diane and asked her whether she knew if Princess Zeba had stayed in this hotel using a different name. Diane looked very surprised and said she would not know if that was the case. But what other name did Parvati think the princess used? Diana asked curiously. Callista Khan, maybe, said Parvati. She could have sworn that Diane was shocked to hear the name. But that expression was so fleeting that Parvati felt she may have imagined it. No, I'm not aware of the princess using that name, replied Diane. Parvati returned the folder to her and thanked her for her hospitality. Parvati stepped out of the hotel and walked around a bit. She stopped to read the plaque in front of the Grief General store right next to the inn. Intrigued by the fact that this store was built in the mid-1840s, she decided to go in and take a look. It was a fascinating store filled to the brim with mostly local antiques. Parvati browsed through the artifacts, many of them reflecting daily life from the past as well as special occasions as they were celebrated decades ago. She picked up two books about Benton sports history and walked over to pay at the counter. Even the counter was surrounded by a variety of unique artifacts, observed Parvati, while waiting for the customer in front of her to pay for the basket of diverse and some unusual items he had placed on the counter. On reaching home after an uneventful drive, the first thing Parvati decided was to Google the name Charles Ingham. As she hit the search button, to her utter surprise, many links showed up. She was certainly not expecting to see so much information about Charles Ingham. The more she read about Charles, the more fascinated she became. Charles was a prominent actor in the anti-slavery Underground Railroad initiative. He carried out a daring and successful journey starting in 1858 across Iowa, with 12 men, women, and children freed from slavery. They finally crossed the Mississippi River at Davenport in late March 1859. Within 2 days, the escaped slaves would take a ferry to freedom in Ontario, Canada. But what made Parvati catch her breath was what happened after that. All the articles and reports said the same thing. Only 9 months after the escaped slaves took the ferry to Canada, Charles Ingham would be dead, hung for treason. It is believed that he let himself be caught because that was the only way his lover could escape. The identity of his lover has been shrouded in secrecy, said all the articles. The only thing known about her is that she came from Europe. Oh, not again, groaned Parvati. So did this mean a change of plan yet again? With this information about Charles Ingham, Hotel Manning seemed to be inviting her for a visit tomorrow. Well, she thought, logging into her Gmail account, I might as well let Professor Cortez know right away that I need to reschedule the meeting with her. But even as she logged in, the first thing she saw was an email from Professor Cortez. Dear Parvati, I hope your visit to Mason House Inn was useful. I think we are both looking for answers to the same questions. I have a suggestion. Instead of meeting at the university, why don't we meet at Hotel Manning tomorrow? By the way, I should have alerted you to not speak with Diane about the material in the folder. I'm sure she appeared rather taken aback when you asked her about Callista Khan. She called me, to let me know about your question. You see, Callista was a young lady who came to see at the Mason House Inn in 1999. And then vanished, mysteriously, 24 hours after checking in. All her belongings were in her room. There was also an odd item, an industrial ice tong with the infinity symbol etched on the handle that was found on the bed in her room. I will share more when we meet tomorrow. Till then, please don't share this information about Callista Khan with anyone. Parvati could not believe what she had just read. An hour and a half ago, she had been standing behind a man at the grief store counter in Bentonsport while he was finishing up his payment. The item in his shopping basket that had particularly attracted her attention was the outsized ice tong with the symbol of infinity etched on the handle. Thank you.
Wow.